I woke up early that morning, like any other day, with the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. My wife, Emily, hummed softly as she prepared breakfast. She looked radiant, her laughter filling the room as she told me about her plans for the day. A yoga class, lunch with a friend, and some shopping. I smiled, nodding along, but something felt off. It wasn't her words, nor her actions, but an uneasiness I couldn't shake. Maybe it was how her phone never left her side these days, or how she ended conversations abruptly when I walked into the room. Later that day, while she was out, I noticed her laptop open on the dining table. Normally, I wouldn't snoop, but curiosity got the better of me. As I moved the cursor, the screen lit up, and there it was, a chat window with a name I didn't recognize. The messages were harmless at first, casual greetings and jokes. But as I scrolled up, my hands trembled. The words stung like knives. "Last night was amazing," one read. Another said, "I can't wait to see you again." I closed the laptop and sat there, my mind racing. Confront her? That would be too easy, too predictable. Instead, I decided I'd handle this my way. Quietly, carefully. That night, as we sat at the dinner table, she laughed at something on her phone, completely unaware that I now knew everything. I joined her laughter, pretending everything was normal, but inside I was already planning. She wouldn't know what hit her. Over the next few days, I began to observe her more closely, without giving away what I knew. Emily's patterns were predictable. Her yoga sessions stretched longer than they should, her lunches with friends became frequent, and her excuses to stay out late piled up. I played along, never questioning her, never hinting at what I was piecing together. One evening, while she was in the shower, I found her phone left unattended on the nightstand. Normally locked this time, it wasn't. My heart raced as I opened the messages, scrolling through her conversations. The man's name was Ryan. Their exchanges were filled with plans for secret meetings, intimate confessions, and the kind of passion she hadn't shown me in years. I felt a cold rage rise within me, but I forced myself to stay calm. Anger wasn't going to solve this. It was strategy that would win the day. I took screenshots of their messages and saved them to a hidden folder on my laptop. Evidence. That was step one. The next step was even more critical. I began securing all our financial assets, transferring funds from joint accounts into a personal one she didn't know existed. Quietly, methodically, I changed the passwords to our shared accounts, ensuring she'd be locked out when the time came. I even contacted a lawyer to understand my options, keeping the entire process under wraps. Every night, she'd kiss me goodnight, oblivious to the storm brewing right under her nose. And every night, I'd lie awake, perfecting my plan. This wasn't just about ending things. It was about making sure she felt the weight of her choices every single day for the rest of her life. One day, I told her I had a work trip coming up, something urgent and unavoidable. She smiled, almost too eagerly, as if relieved that I'd be away. I watched her carefully as she pretended to care, offering to help me pack. She thought she was clever, but I could see the anticipation in her eyes. She was planning to meet him the moment I left. What she didn't know was that I wasn't going anywhere. I left early that morning, suitcase in hand, giving her a goodbye kiss on the cheek. "Don't miss me too much," I teased, watching her forced smile as she waved me off. The moment my car disappeared from sight, I circled back and parked down the street, hidden behind a line of trees. An hour later, she emerged from the house, dressed to impress in a way she hadn't for me in years. I clenched the steering wheel as she drove off, knowing exactly where she was heading. I followed her at a distance, careful not to be seen. She pulled into a hotel parking lot, and just as I expected, Ryan was waiting for her. I snapped photos from the car, capturing every incriminating moment as they embraced and disappeared inside. My chest burned, but I refused to let emotions take over. This was just part of the process. While they were busy upstairs, I was busy too. I entered the hotel lobby and requested a room key, pretending to have lost mine. It was astonishing how easy it was with a little charm and a fabricated name. Minutes later, I was standing outside their door, listening to the muffled laughter and whispered words. My stomach churned. but I stayed calm. There would be no confrontation. Not yet. Instead, I slid a small envelope under the door. Inside was a single photograph of Emily and me from our wedding day, with the words, "I know everything," scrawled across it. I smirked, imagining the panic that would spread through the room when they saw it. By the time they came out to look, I was already gone. Back at home, I waited patiently, knowing it wouldn't take long for her to return. When she did, her face was pale, her eyes darting nervously as she fumbled with excuses about her friend-canceling plans. I let her lie. The fear in her eyes was satisfying enough for now. That night, while she slept, I made the final adjustments to my plan. The photos, the screenshots, the financial transfers, everything was in place. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the end for Emily and her lover. The next morning, Emily seemed distracted, her usual composure unraveling. She avoided my eyes, her hands trembling slightly as she poured herself a cup of coffee. I acted as if nothing was wrong, keeping my tone light and my demeanor calm. "I've got some errands to run," I told her casually. She barely acknowledged me, too preoccupied with whatever thoughts were racing through her guilty mind. As I left, I sent an email from a new account I had created under a fake name. The email was addressed to her lover, Ryan, and included a series of photos, intimate moments of him and Emily captured at the hotel, along with a simple message, "Does your wife know?" By the time I returned home, the chaos had already begun. Emily's phone was buzzing nonstop, her face pale as she stared at the screen. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with panic, but I simply smiled, pretending not to notice. "Everything okay?" I asked, feigning concern. "Yes," she stammered, quickly locking her phone. But I knew better. Later that evening, I decided to escalate things further. During dinner, I slid a folder across the table. "What's this?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Open it," I replied, leaning back in my chair. Inside, she found copies of the photos, the screenshots of their messages, and a detailed financial statement showing that our joint accounts were now empty. Her breath hitched as she flipped through the pages, her hands trembling. "You thought I didn't know," I said calmly, "but I've known for a while. And now, Emily, it's your turn to face the consequences." Tears welled up in her eyes as she began to stammer apologies, but I wasn't interested in her excuses. "Save it," I said coldly. "You made your choices, and now you'll live with them." Just as she began to plead, the doorbell rang. I stood up, leaving her frozen in place as I opened the door to reveal Ryan's wife. She stormed in, clutching the same photos and messages I had sent earlier. "You ruined my family!" she screamed, pointing a finger at Emily, who sat there speechless. The confrontation that followed was nothing short of poetic. Ryan's wife exposed him for the fraud he was, threatening divorce and ensuring he'd lose everything. Emily, caught in the middle of the wreckage, was left humiliated and broken. As the chaos unfolded, I stepped outside, leaving the two women to their heated exchange. I didn't need to stay and watch. The seeds of destruction had already been planted, and the results were everything I had hoped for. The house was eerily silent that night, except for the faint sound of Emily crying in the bedroom. I stayed in the living room, sipping a glass of whiskey, watching the shadows dance on the walls. This wasn't satisfaction. It was clarity. The next morning, Emily approached me cautiously, her face pale and her eyes swollen from crying. "Please," she began, her voice breaking. "I made a mistake. I don't know what I was thinking. Can we fix this?" I stared at her for a long moment, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. Then I set my glass down and spoke, my voice steady. "Fix what, Emily? The trust you shattered? The life we built together that you threw away? No, there's no fixing this." She fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. But I felt nothing. The love I once had for her was buried under the mountain of betrayal she had created. "You made your choice," I said, standing up. "And now, I'm making mine." I had already planned my exit: a new apartment, a new life, and enough financial security to leave this chapter behind without looking back. The house would be sold, and the proceeds split. She'd have enough to get by, but nothing more. I wasn't going to leave her destitute, but I wasn't going to make it easy for her either. As I packed my bags, she followed me around, pleading and begging for another chance. "We can go to therapy," she said desperately. "We can work through this." I paused, looking her straight in the eye. "Therapy doesn't fix selfishness, Emily. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed everything we stood for. That's not something I can forgive." Her sobs echoed through the house as I walked out the door, the weight of her consequences finally settling on her shoulders. In the weeks that followed, I heard bits and pieces about her life through mutual acquaintances. Ryan had abandoned her the moment his own life began to crumble. His wife had filed for divorce, taking everything, leaving him as broken as the promises he had made to Emily. As for Emily, she was struggling to find her footing, alone and isolated. She reached out to me a few times, calls, emails, even showing up at my new apartment once, but I ignored them all. My silence was the final blow, a reminder that some betrayals are unforgivable. Meanwhile, I was thriving. I threw myself into my work, started going to the gym again, and even joined a few social groups. I wasn't looking for love, at least not yet, but I was rediscovering who I was outside of the marriage. And every now and then, I'd glance at the folder of evidence I kept tucked away in a drawer. Not because I needed a reminder of what she had done, but because it reminded me of how far I had come. It's been months since I walked out, but the echoes of that night still linger in the quiet moments. Sometimes I catch myself staring out of the window, as if waiting for her to come running back, begging for forgiveness. But I know better now. There's no return from this. Not for us. My life is different now. I'm different. There's a sense of freedom I hadn't realized I was missing. I'm no longer weighed down by her lies, by the betrayal that once defined me. I've rebuilt myself, stronger, more aware, more cautious. I've met new people along the way, women who are kind, genuine. They don't carry the baggage that Emily did, the secrets and the manipulations. There's no rush, no pressure. I'm learning what it feels like to be desired for who I truly am, without the scars of my past. As for Emily, I hear whispers through the grapevine. She's living in a small apartment now, far from the life we shared. From what I know, she's still haunted by the ghosts of her choices. There's no redemption for her, not in my eyes. She'll live with the consequences of her actions forever, as will I. But I've moved on. I've let go of the anger, the bitterness that consumed me. What's done is done. I don't need revenge anymore. The satisfaction came not from watching her crumble, but from realizing that I survived, that I was capable of rebuilding my life from the ashes she left behind. I'm not the man I was when I first found out. I'm stronger now. I know my worth, and I will never allow myself to be anyone's second choice again.